Hi there, welcome back to another video / episode of the James Red Podcast. Today I'm here with somebody who I find to be quite interesting. I've kept up with him for a while now, and so I'm very excited to speak to him. His name is Pablo Strong. He's a photographer and YouTube creator who wanders the streets in the UK, and obviously this is interesting to me. I've had my eye on him for a while, like I said, so I'm excited to talk about all of his projects, specifically his Streets of London project, but whatever other directions we decide to go is perfectly fine with me. And I'm always happy to have someone with an English accent on my channel. I try to pull that off as much as humanly possible. But I will link below to his things. He's a very interesting creator. Thank you for your time, Pablo. And how's your day going?
It's going very well, thank you. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. It's a lovely, warm summer day here.
I love it. I understand that the weather can be a little bit bipolar in the UK sometimes.
It can. I went on an epic dog walk earlier today, and I got completely soaked. And now I'm in the conservatory, and I can barely open my eyes because it's so sunny.
That's how I prefer my dog walks to be epic.
Yeah, it was biblical.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Biblical, even better. So I'm curious, what creative pursuits are you up to on a daily basis, in your words?
Well, it's an interesting question, really, because I'm kind of known on YouTube for photography and for video work. My documentary series across London, Streets of London, and also my street photography work. But I'm also a full-time opera singer, and I've touched on this a bit in my videos, but to a large extent I've kind of kept those two things kind of separate, just to not kind of confuse people. But also it's nice for me to have completely different creative pursuits that I do that are completely separate, so that, you know, I don't have to think about one the whole time. I don't have to think about the other.
And those are very separate creative pursuits, for sure.
Kind of, yeah. Although everything ties together in a way. I mean,
I always say that every craft inspires another in some way or another.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And I take so much pleasure in both. So I have a full-time opera singing job in central London at a place called the English National Opera, it's a big company in the UK for opera. And it's the biggest theatre, I think, in London. It's 2,500 seats. So I'm there every night singing to an audience, it's kind of bizarre sometimes when I'm walking around the streets taking photographs and talking to people, and then I think, like, in the evening I'm going to be doing this completely different thing. But I love having that kind of contrast.
That sounds very like a very interesting way to live your creative life. I love it.
Yeah.
So what got you into opera singing?
Well, it's a very long story, really. Essentially, in a nutshell, I sang opera when I was a young boy. There are sometimes children's roles in shows, and I got some of those, and it just snowballed from there. And then I kept singing through university, and then just got into the industry after that, really. So it's always been around.
Interesting. Yeah. So are you more of a tenor or a soprano, or what?
I'm
a bass?
Tenor.
Okay, very good. Gotcha. Yeah. Awesome. I think that's incredibly interesting, and it explains why when I look through your Instagram feed, I see pictures of you sitting in a dressing room looking like you've traveled through time.
Yes. Yeah.
I was like, okay, he's Abraham Lincoln today. The next day he's some sort of Persian king.
Yeah. It's very varied. We do at the moment we do sort of 8 or 9 shows per season, and the season's like is a year. So so whenever one day I'll go to, so we'll be doing 3 shows at once. So I'll go into the theatre and I'll have a show set in the 19th century, and then the next day I'll go in and I'm doing a show set in the 17th century, 17th century Italy, Then the next day I'll go in and it's set in 1950s Birmingham.
Yeah.
It's like every day it's different.
Do you do any
So
futuristic sci-fi operas?
Sci-fi operas. No, I mean, as of yet, I haven't gone beyond the present moment. I've done everything up to there. But no sci-fi.
Okay,
No,
I see. Well, maybe speak to your director. I think that might be a great idea.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, so with your YouTube channel, so I want to speak specifically to the Streets of London series, because I think it's such a fantastic example of overcoming a lot of challenges at once to pull off an idea that is something, I don't know. I don't. It's hard to come about accomplishing an idea like Streets of London without it being a very purely passion project, because you're literally just walking onto the streets and saying, I'm going to find 3 people to talk with today, and then I'm going to edit it together into something that is, what you do is very raw and sort of open-ended, and it's different than a lot of what I see on YouTube, and that's one thing that I find so interesting about it. But so I love this series. What was the vision for starting this series?
I actually remember the first interview I did. It was the guy with a bow tie in Streets of London in episode 1.
Sounds like a fitting start.
Yeah. He had a bow tie. He used to so he made clothes. He designed clothes. Well, let me go back a little bit actually, because that's not really answering your question. What sort of prompted me to do it? I think I don't even know why I started it, really. I like I like the challenge of talking to strangers and finding out their story. I find it fascinating how people are walking down the same street and they are having a completely different experience from one another. And in that moment, everyone is just walking on the same street doing exactly the same thing, and nothing is particularly wrong with their lives. But we're all carrying around with us baggage, memories of, I need to be thinking about this, or this is happening in my life, or this has happened to me, or I'm feeling great today, or whatever, good and bad baggage. And so I just kind of found it fascinating that people could be doing exactly the same thing, but having a totally different experience. But another thing is that I'm interested in people's stories. I like to hear what people talk about. But it was also a challenge for me when I started this series to see if I could. I think what I aim to do with Streets of London is find the common ground between everyone. And I had a hunch that if I start talking to people that are very different from each other, that there would be common themes running between people. And that is exactly what I found. So I asked kind of very similar questions to each person, and I let the interaction go naturally the direction it's going to go. But generally, I hope that the series shows that people, are having very similar life experiences in a way.
Yeah.
That kind of contradicts what I was saying before. But what I mean is that the motivation for people is, there's a common ground. So I've kind of gone I feel like I've just contradicted myself there, but I don't think I have. I think essentially what I notice is that people are having very different types of days, in that same street, but also there is common ground between everyone. Well, and I think that's why people like the series as well.
Yeah, well, it's funny that as you're saying, you're struggling with the contradiction in your head. Just before you said that, I'm thinking one of the most interesting things about the project is that you have this natural divergence of opinions and thoughts that you'll see from people, but you also have these natural intersections. When you ask people what makes them happy, I feel like you probably get similar answers, such as having family around, like the one I just watched. I think it's your latest one, 15.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Something like that.
Yeah. The guy, I forget where he was from, but he was the guy that had moved to 11 different places, and you were trying to trace him back to his origins of where he was.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And he had a stutter as well. And so he was saying that, having a good family around you, and this is sort of a universal truth. And so you have this natural breaking up of people, right? Like some of the people that you talk to are visually incredibly different, and they're going to have different ways of looking at the world. But there's also these very natural intersections that we all have as humans. And so I don't think it's a contradicting thought. I think it's a complementing thought, if anything.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's kind of at the heart of it, really. I guess it's one of those things that I didn't really have a big idea or big plan, or I still don't really have a big vision for it, really. It's essentially, I like talking to people. I like the challenge of finding out as quickly as possible, getting to the heart of what makes people tick. What motivates them. Are they happy? Are they not happy? Essentially, those fundamental things, and it's a liberating thing, really, in a way, for me, and maybe people watching, but also sometimes, I think, or often for the people that I interview. And I've had people say to me as well that it was kind of therapeutic. A kind of therapeutic experience, and I'm by no means a therapist, and I don't aim to fix anyone's problems with my series in any way. But for people, sometimes we never really get the chance to talk about ourselves. Really, I think in our day-to-day lives generally. So sometimes those things just mull over in our head, and those ideas never really get formed, and then we just kind of so having a chance to actually put into words how you feel about this and how you feel about that, I think people find it quite kind of cathartic. And I think that's why I get quite honest responses from people.
Yeah, well, and I'm sure they appreciate that you ask questions that warrant deep responses. I think that our culture tends to naturally fall into this sort of groove of having surface level conversations. And you're right, people don't get to sort through the things in their head that maybe they're working through, or the things that maybe they don't ask themselves enough. What makes me happy? Maybe they haven't had somebody to listen to them for the last 6 months about something that's going on in their lives. Maybe they feel lonely, and you made their day a little bit better. And I think it's real, and it's interesting. Conversations are interesting because people don't always, they don't always reveal their feelings and intentions about the conversation to you. It's sort of this hopeful experience. You kind of hope that you're doing something good for the other person, and that you're having an exchange that you will feel good about later. But you don't really know until after. And that's why I think it's important to be very sort of focused in your conversations with other people, because you may never know what smiling at them meant to them, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a really special thing. And I think the bigger changes that we can make in life are made up of all of these little baby changes. And so
I think also, sorry.
No, go ahead. I don't think I had anything else interesting to say.
I was just going to say that I think that also there's a misconception generally within photography and street photography, but also just general life, that people are going to be hostile if you talk to them in the street, or if you start asking personal questions. people are going to dislike that. And I think a lot of people use that as an excuse to avoid interacting with people generally. And also London has, I think British people have a reputation, and Londoners in particular have a reputation for being very closed off and unwilling to talk. And I don't really agree with that. To be honest, I don't think it's any that different really to anywhere else. What I found during this series, where I talked to random people in the street, is that people are very happy to talk, and if they're not, for every person I interview, I've had. Or for every 10 people I interview, I have like 2 or 3 people saying no when I ask if they can do an interview. I've never had anyone react in a hostile way to me. They've all just said no, sorry, or sorry, I haven't got the time, or I'm waiting for a friend, or whatever. So no one is offended. There's nothing offensive about me asking them opinions. But also, if I'm talking to someone and I go down an avenue of conversation that they're not happy with, sometimes I can feel them kind of closing down a little bit, and they kind of put the barrier up, and you can change direction, and they'll be happy. You can tell they're kind of happier again. Or sometimes the interaction kind of dies at that point because they've just put the barrier up. But that's a fairly organic sort of dynamic in a conversation. It's nothing unusual. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that people are very receptive and open to talking, and so I think there's a real misconception that somehow that people are going to be hostile or find it invasive if I ask them personal questions.
It's funny that you say that the general thought tends to be that people will be more hostile. You always see these comments on any given street photography YouTube video, and particularly ones where interactions go sort of southward, and you have the occasional person who is frustrated because you're a candid street photographer. You took a photo and they're like, "Where's your permit?" And they get, the comments below tend to be something along the lines of, "If you came to my city, you would get punched in the face if that happened." And I haven't been all around the world, but I've never found that city where you get punched in the face.
Yeah. Maybe it's that person that would punch you in the face.
Right. Exactly. Or maybe it's just a 12-year-old in their basement, and
yeah.
But so I've been to the most photographically challenging place I've been to is Haiti, right?
Okay.
And language barrier, and it's a beautiful place, and you really want to take photos of the people and the juxtapose them beautifully against the landscape that's behind them. And that's where I've had the most trouble. One, because I barely knew how to ask them if I could take their photo. And two, I think that, I look tremendously different, and sometimes there can be a negative perception of people who are coming across the pond to take photos, like, where's this photo going to end up, especially after the earthquake and this sort of thing. But even then, people were incredibly welcoming. We made a short film about a guy who was he was a tailor, and he had a I think it was a tailor. He had a sewing machine on his front porch, and I believe this was how he made money. And he lost a bunch of his friends in the earthquake. Made a short film about him, and he was incredibly kind. Just this random guy we bumped into. And so even if you have some trouble in certain situations, that doesn't mean that. I think most people are willing to have a conversation if they feel like they can trust you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way I see it, I think there are so many. I tend to just not think. Try not to think about. Just I as a general life hack here. This is for your viewers. Don't think too much.
Yes.
Okay. So I try and avoid analyzing situations. In the past, when I was growing up, I was always I was hyper analytical of everything, and always mulling over things in my head, and it doesn't get you anywhere. So I guess actually, in a funny way, that's kind of also another thing I find interesting in talking to people, because because people get stuck in life on some very small things that to an outside person might seem quite insignificant. So when you watch Streets of London, you might think if you're watching someone that's struggling with something that you wouldn't worry about, you might look at that and think, well, if only I could help them see that that's not important.
Absolutely.
And then maybe it helps you think about your own life and what things you take too seriously. So I tend to I've just sidetracked myself here. I can't remember what I was saying. But
I do it all the time. You have to embrace the sidetrack and the awkwardness. It's okay.
Yeah,
we'll get through this.
Yeah. So I mean, I think I try not to think about things too much, and just kind of, I can't remember what I was saying, but basically, just go for it. You know, like people, if you're worried about people being hostile. Oh yeah, this is what I was going to say. So
we found it.
The way I found it, the way I see it basically is that you can come up with all kinds of excuses as a photographer or whatever for why you shouldn't talk to this person here, you shouldn't take this person's photo, or you can't take photos in this country or whatever. But essentially, it's a human interaction between two people, and so, you know, if I'm talking to someone in the street, I'm not relying on the crutch of like, oh, I'm a street whatever videographer or photographer, or I'm a YouTuber or whatever. I'm not relying on that to give me confidence or to kind of back anything up, because I feel like that's creating a barrier between you and the person. Essentially, I'm having an interaction with someone, so there's nothing else to be explained there. If I can make that person feel at ease in a normal way that I would talking to a friend or anyone else, then we're going to have a good interaction. If that person's going to be hostile for whatever reason, it's not necessary. I don't think it's really going to be because I'm taking their photo or because I'm asking their permission to talk or to take a photo. They're going to be hostile because they don't want to talk to a stranger in the street, just on a human interaction level, maybe just on that day or in general. So I tend to not think about these things too much, not worry that the moralistic side, or am I doing something that's going to piss people off, or am I doing something that's kind of invasive? You know, if they're happy, they're happy. If they're not, I leave it. There are so many other people around, it doesn't really matter.
So I'm a rather heady, analytical type of person as well, and I've been on my own journey of doing this especially with conversations, because I can overthink a conversation in 3 seconds, whether it's a stranger on the street, or whether it's you, or whether it's my wife or anybody. And I have learned it's this weird set of paradoxes that happens in your brain when you're dealing with these situations, because you're dealing with, like, the conversation might actually take a turn that's a little bit uncomfortable. That does happen. Or maybe you won't communicate a thing as well as you would like to communicate a thing. And so the art is learning how to deal with that lack of sureness and being okay with that. And also knowing that a lot of times thinking is the enemy of experience.
Yeah.
That you need to allow yourself to face those uncomfortable challenges. Those are actually really good things for you. And you'll come out on the other side feeling a lot better than if you would have sort of stayed in your bubble and kept things safe for you. And so it's sort of this, it's trying to use your brain to work through articulate these problems to yourself and work through them, but also not go too far down the rabbit hole that you freeze yourself. You can't move forward. And that's a very tough thing. But another thing that I think is wonderful about what you're doing is that people, when they have problems, they become these huge monsters in your head a lot of times.
Yeah.
And I love how philosophical we're going right now. This is fantastic. It's this huge cloud of scariness in your head, And what talking about something does, what language does, is helps you get it out of your head and turn it into like a singularity in front of you. You can look at it and go, oh, that's what that was, right?
Yeah.
And you can, and so when you talk to these people and you say, hey, what's a struggle that you have, right? And they share that struggle. Maybe they've never spoken about that before, but talking about that has helped them figure out a way to articulate it not only to you but to themselves. And it came out of their mouth, and they realized, oh, that wasn't as scary as I thought it would be. For one, to talk about it, but two, to face it.
Yeah.
That's one of the wonderful things about deep conversations, why I think they're so important. I was curious also, when you leave the house to go, I'm going to do a Streets of London today. What does that process look like for you? From leaving to going to the city to walking up to a person, who do you approach? What makes you want to approach them? This and that.
Well, it's changed a bit recently now that I don't live actually in London. Oh, my dog's just walked in. Hello. Now that I don't actually live in London, I have to plan it a little bit more. I have to plan my gaps in my week where I'm going to be in town. So because I work basically just above Trafalgar Square in central London, I will have 2 hours off, let's say, in a day, or 3 hours at some point, or maybe even 45 minutes. And I can just leave the building and I'm in central London. I have my camera. I can shoot one interview. I can shoot two. If I've got a few hours, I could shoot a whole episode of Streets of London. And so I always bring my camera around, really.
How long does it normally take you
to film a whole episode?
To film an entire one.
It depends, really. I mean, I think the last one possibly I filmed in one go. So I filmed maybe 2 hours. Okay. It depends on how many people I interview, really. But what I usually try and keep it to around 3 people. But sometimes maybe I'll interview 3 people, and I don't think that there'll be good interviews, but I don't feel like there's a strong enough sort of counterpoint with each other to make an episode together. So maybe I will just put that in a folder on my computer until I've added some more interviews, and then maybe I'll just put those chunks together. So when you see a Streets of London episode, quite often it's chunks, and the little snippets between interviews are shot over a month or whatever. Just when I've got gaps, when I see interesting things, I'll capture it, and
like little B-roll in between the conversations.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I'll capture those moments and random odd things around town, and some of them never leave or some of them end up on the cutting room floor, but those bits eventually will make their way into an episode. So sometimes to answer your question, sometimes it's done in a day, sometimes it's done over a month or whatever. And actually there have been times when I've switched camera gear in between, and you can see the join, because there'll be an episode with some Canon stuff and then an episode with some other stuff and or different microphone. It took me a while at the beginning of the series to work out the right way to mic it, basically. And the way I have now is still not perfect, but
I just picture you shifting from like a webcam to a full frame camera, and then like cutting between them as you do, where you have the conversations interspersed with one another. This horrible pixelated mess, as they call it on the internet, the potato camera. And then you have the beautiful full frame A7 dynamic range awesomeness over here.
Yeah, well, no, my camera, I started with a point and shoot. I started the series with a point and shoot. And then the audio was rubbish. So I needed to plug in a microphone. But until I switched cameras, I had a Zoom microphone. So I would do this kind of back and forth thing like you see, always on TV or whatever. And, but then what was wrong with that? I was getting loads of wind noise and cutting off my sentences and stuff like that when I'm asking questions. It was really awkward. And so then I switched to a 70D with a microphone on top. And then I switched that to a Panasonic 4K thing, which is a nice small setup now.
Hmm.
and with a microphone on top. So yeah, that was the technical side of things.
Very good. So when you're approaching somebody, what
Yeah.
does that process look like for you? What do you say to them to initiate the conversation?
I just say I'm doing some street interviews. Do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions?
Straightforward. I like it.
It's straightforward. I mean, this is something I was actually talking with one of my friends about this the other day. We were talking about doing street portraits, and I think basically, I think many people, if they're struggling with talking to people, asking to take their photo or video or whatever, they are overcomplicating things.
Absolutely.
And that can come across as a bit shifty. If you go up to someone and say, "Hi, sorry to stop you. I'm doing a project at the moment, and I have my camera here, and I just wanted to capture scenes around London and talk to that person's going to have got bored and maybe started to question what you're doing by the end of
as well, right? If it feels like prepared introduction to what you're doing, it feels
exactly. I mean, if someone if someone wants to talk, they're going to talk. If someone doesn't, that they're not. So you just want to get to the point. I'm doing some interviews. Can I ask you a quick question? That's all they need. The only other thing sometimes I get is what's it for?
That's what I was going to say. A lot of the good thing is when you do that, sort of the burden is on them to ask whatever questions they feel like they need to ask to feel more comfortable with what you're doing. So it makes sense. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, just keep it simple. Like there's nothing. I mean, there's this whole school of street photography, which is kind of where it's kind of I don't know, sort of just seems like a little bit. The intentions are a little bit shifty there. Like maybe you're going around the street and snapping candid scenes.
You got his camera out.
Put your camera right up in someone's face and capturing these
hopping out from behind bushes. You have flashes.
Yeah, and I'm not a big fan in that. I don't think it's very fair often on the subject, and I hope that people can see through my work that I care about the people that I talk to. I care about the people that I photograph. I'm never out there to ridicule anyone or even to really show up too many flaws in people or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. You come off as a very kind, diplomatic person, I think, which helps you out in those situations.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad it comes across that way. I mean, I care about people, and that's part of the reason why I take the time to find out what they're interested in and what that's kind of why I'm interested in their stories. If I had a motive to get amusing content out of people or to make them upset or something, to like find out things that really upset them, then I wouldn't. It would show in my work, and there would be, I think, a separation between me and the subject. So, yeah. I can't remember how I got into that.
No, you're good. You're good. That was really good stuff. I think a lot of the balance with the appeal of the challenge and the balance that you have to strike with some art form where you're interacting with people, and especially strangers on a daily basis, is just calming the analytical part of your brain and allowing yourself to experience the organic, wonderful experiences that can come from interacting with another human being. It's like I feel like we're always looking for that sort of flow state of when it feels just right. The conversation feels great. You feel like the video is doing what it needs to do. The camera is not catching on fire in the middle of it. And if you're taking photos, you take a photo that you feel really good about, and you had a wonderful interaction with that person or what have you. And it's like oftentimes your thoughts are the key barrier to not achieving that state.
Yeah.
I think that's an important thing to reckon with.
Analysis paralysis.
Yes.
Yeah. No, so, I agree. I definitely agree with that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think we all deal with it on different levels. I admire people though who who can really, they can figure out how to compartmentalize their brain, and put certain things over here when they don't need to be used. Use the parts that allow them to fall into the experience. And you see this with great musicians, for example.
Yeah,
they can sort of just, and I'm sure in your craft and opera singing as well, you can sort of fall into this pocket of comfortability, and it's this intersection between competence and confidence. It's not too challenging that you have to think about it too much, but it's not too easy that it's not too unengaging and boring. There's like this nice middle ground.
Yeah.
You get this flow state, and it's a really special thing. And I found that my thoughts will get in the way of that, because I'm trying so hard to make sure that I do the thing correctly, that you actually end up making yourself more robotic, and you don't achieve that next level of competence that is available to you if you decide to do that.
Well, I think there's a few points about that, really. One is that I think people overthink things because they're kind of worried about the outcome. So somehow, by mulling over all of the options, that they might feel like they're getting somewhere. So this might manifest itself in video photography, that you think, well, sometimes if you see someone you want to photograph in the street, your thought process might be, oh, they're busy, and then you're like, oh, maybe they're not busy. You have this dialogue in your head, and then you're like, well, actually, they don't look very friendly, so I might get punched in the face. And then,
he looked at me funny. I don't know if I want to talk to that guy.
Yeah. Or I've walked too far now, or I'm going too fast, or my
That's a big one.
All of these random things that might pop up into your head. But the real solution to that is to just do it, and to do it loads and loads of times. You can listen to me just to say, just saying, just do it. But or a friend to say, look, don't worry about it, just do it, or whatever. That will help. But actually, I'm not giving anyone anything they don't have already. So, you have the ability to do that. All you have to do is just notice that there's something in your head saying don't do something, and then you just do it anyway. And eventually you just regain power over that part of your head that's telling you to stop doing things. When it comes to performing and talking about flow and things like that, I don't really think about it too much now, but I used to in the past. Because now I think these things just come naturally when you stop analyzing them too much. But for example, as a performer, when I'm singing an opera, the music is happening. If I stop and think about things, I will get left behind in the music.
Yeah.
So and the action is happening. So if I suddenly standing in the wings, I'm about to go on, and I start worrying about something, I'm not going to get on stage in time. So like I practice every day overriding the bit of my head that's telling me to do this or do that, because I have no choice. The stakes are too high. If I stop, I will get left behind. So that's a nice analogy for dealing with any fear, really, and dealing with anything uncomfortable. It's that, the more you think about it, I'm not going to come up with a lovely, cute quote here, but it would be kind of a messy quote. But the more, the more, if you think about things too much, you're just going to get left behind. So just notice that you're thinking about stuff like that, or whatever. The voice in your head that's telling you to not do this or not do that, or saying, it comes up everywhere. It's like, the voice in your head that says, oh, my camera's not good enough to like be taken seriously, so I need to get a more expensive one. Just learn to hear that and just ignore it and just keep going.
Go ahead.
Well, yeah, and the anxiety that's associated with those thoughts, like, oh, don't talk to that person, don't get their photo, and don't ask for their photo in the street. You feel anxious.
Mm.
if you just do it anyway, you'll still feel anxious. Like, don't kid yourself. You'll feel anxious.
Mm.
But then maybe 5 times later, you'll feel a bit less anxious. And then when you've done 10 interviews with people in the street, you'll feel less anxious. And then when you've done 100, you might feel no anxiety at all.
Yeah.
So it's like, just plow through, basically.
Oh, you use words like plow through and override, and those are fantastic words to explain the sort of process that you have to engage in to get through the anxiety on a daily basis. One of the things that has been extremely helpful to me is looking at the creative process, or looking at the act of creating, as instead of trying to pursue an idealistic version of the thing that you're trying to achieve, look at it as experimenting. And even in front of people, right? Look at it as experimenting. And this allows your brain to go, okay, I'm gonna, and obviously if you're on stage you're with other people, you can't start going into other keys and,
you'd be surprised.
Change the time signature. Yeah. But within your craft, looking at it as if it's an experiment, right? I'm not a perfect person. I'm trying to play in front of people and see how it goes. And hopefully it goes well, and hopefully they take something from it. But there's a value to the lack of perfection in art, because it's a human way to approach it.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I've been thinking about a bit recently, because it's funny that we're talking about this, really, because I tend to try not to think about things too much, but I on the side,
I'm going to ruin your entire YouTube channel.
And yeah, on the side, I do have an interest in I have a very strong interest, really, in things like this, and confidence generally. And it's probably at the heart of why I've ended up doing the kind of videos and photos and things that I do, because I find those things interesting. But God, I'm really bad at remembering what I was going to say. What were you just saying again?
Okay, no, I was saying that there's value between experimenting instead of pursuing perfection.
I've got it. So I think there's something I've noticed that from my own experiences, and I'm talking to other people as well. I think people share this experience, that I don't know whether it's a modern thing because people get known for one thing online. People like to compartmentalize someone as like, oh, they're a blogger, they're a photographer, or whatever. Sorry, my hands are probably a bit distracting there.
No, you're good. You can ask my wife. I'm a very hand-oriented talking human being. It helps me figure out how to say things.
On the camera, though, that's the thing.
Yeah, for anybody who's listening, we're doing aerobics with our hands right now. It's very exciting.
So I think people tend to have the feeling, and I felt like this in the past as well, that you're searching around to find the one thing which is your thing. You're searching around to find creatively the one thing, whether it's like doing videos or doing a certain type of video, or doing a certain type of photography, or using one lens, or whatever it is. People are searching for, not everyone, but this is a feeling that I've had, searching for one thing, and then that can be my thing, and I can drop everything else, all my other creative pursuits, and focus on that, because that's what people like, that's what I enjoy doing, that's my thing.
Mm-hmm. And also that's a way to become masterful over the thing, which has its value.
It has its value. It definitely has its value, but I don't think it's a helpful way of thinking. I think it's constricting, really. Mm-hmm. And if I had been looking for that in the past, or landed on something, then I might have not ended up where I am now, doing the things I want to do. So I think creatively, and you get stuck. I talked about this in a video about getting out of creative ruts recently. If you put yourself in a box and say, well, I'm doing this, I'm this kind of creator or whatever, you get stuck and you burn out, and you, at some point down the line, you start to question why you do things, which is something that we often ask ourselves. I think, why am I doing this? Is the right thing or whatever? And then you kind of burn out and you get stuck, really. So I think creatively, it's very important to be open to changing and be open to trying new things. That's how I ended up doing Streets of London, for example, which has ended up being a quite successful series. It was just one day I thought, well, I'm walking around town making vlogs about London, but why not, rather than me give my opinion on everything, why not actually turn the camera around and talk to other people? So it was out of me thinking, well, maybe these vlogs maybe the kind of walking and talking vlogs I'm doing around town, maybe I could somehow show something a bit more interesting and philosophical, perhaps. So then I kind of went in that direction, and I'm still changing things, and sometimes things just are not interesting anymore. I drop them. Sometimes other things are, or I go through periods of doing this or that. So I think, it was a very roundabout way of saying, basically, I think creatively it's really important to remain supple and open to, constantly ask yourself, actually, what am I interested in? What would be interesting to try? What would be interesting to do? And then just go and try that and see where that takes you. Don't don't hold yourself back by saying, no, I'm a street photographer, so I don't do this. I don't do weddings. I don't do whatever. That's not helpful. All you're doing is holding yourself back, because the more things creatively you do, the more skills you're going to have in your arsenal for when you decide to try something else.
And I can imagine that you would miss, because I'm this way, you would miss the things that the benefits that music and opera brings to you if you cut that out of your life and focus solely on this thing.
If I had I have a nice I'm doing quite well in opera, for example. It's something I don't really talk about on YouTube, but I'm in a good place there at the moment, and that's come through a lot of hard work and dedication, and it's my full-time job now, and I really love doing it. But if I had put myself mentally in a box and said, I am an opera singer, then I may not have
ever... tempting, right?
Yeah, it's easy to do. It's very easy to do, and then you want to just put all your focus on one thing. If I'd done that, I may never have picked up my camera and taken photos, and I may around the streets, and I may never have started making YouTube videos, and I may never have developed a whole other thing, which is now a huge part of my life, and as big as music is, really. So I think that's an example, really, of that philosophy. I think don't be afraid to, don't put yourself in a box, and don't be afraid to completely change direction and try something completely different.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a set of fantastic points, a box of fantastic points, if you will. So I wanted to talk very quickly about some of the other, because we've spent all the time on Streets of London, but you have other videos as well, and I'm curious what the direction is you're currently going after I can never find the proper word to explain what I'm trying to say when I do this, on a 30,000 foot level, let's put it that way, of your channel. What are your goals? What's the direction that you're trying to go at the moment?
Well, it kind of ties in with the last point, really, that I don't have a big vision for, a big direction, really, for my channel. I just make videos about what I like to make videos, on a day-to-day basis, really. If I don't feel like doing street interviews for a while, I won't. And then maybe I'll do a vlog about my life. You know, if I feel interested about showing something, or if I feel interested in sharing my viewpoint on something, I'll do a fixed camera video where I might talk about that, and which I've done recently. So I don't have a big vision really. I guess the Streets of London is a series that I'm really interested in doing, and I think there's a universal appeal. I also think that there's a timelessness to that format, and also that kind of video will become more and more interesting in years to come. So if you looked at one of my Streets of London videos from this year, in 10 years, it will have new layers and new dimensions of interest, I think.
It's funny you say that. I watched a video very recently about, it was elderly people in the 20s or 30s? I forget. It was just them talking about their current life. They were sitting in rocking chairs and talking, and it was absolutely fascinating. There was a video of a guy who was the last living person to see Abraham Lincoln be shot.
Wow.
Which is insane. And he was on a show in the 1920s. And I thought, holy crap, like, cameras are amazing. The fact that we can listen to this guy talk about his experience of one of the most historical events in modern history is amazing. You can learn so much from that. And so I think it's hard to see this perspective because you're living right now, but yes, absolutely. In the year 3000, it's going to be really interesting to listen to someone talk about, or listen to someone talk to somebody in the year 2018 when we still used our feet.
Yeah, or even like the street shops, the street lights. Like everything is always changing. Like any image, if you take a still from any one of my Streets of London videos, but this applies to any photo out and about really, every single thing about it will be different in some way. Like the street lights in the last 10 years in this country, and probably where you are as well, have switched from those kind of yellowy normal kind of bulbs, I don't know what they were,
like a sodium vapor or something like that.
To LEDs, which are kind of white and blue. So like it seems like a very small thing, but it's such a huge, I think aesthetically, it's such a huge shift in like how our lives look. Like my memories of walking around streets, and my own street where I grew up, and the light that came through my window when I was growing up, are of this yellow color. And it seems I never would have ever thought about it at the time that would be different. But now it's like everything's white and blue, and that has a very different feel to it. That's one sort of tangential thing that I've noticed. But I mean, everything down to the fashions and the cars and the kind of stuff that people are talking about, the kind of things they're worried about. Or even maybe the way that they're interacting with me and the language they're using, the colloquial terms they're using, and differences in sort of maybe, all kinds of things. Like all those things will become more and more interesting. So I think that's a series I'm definitely passionate to kind of keep going. But I can't remember how we got there, but
no, it was good. It was good. It was good. It was a good wandering, I suppose. I just watched a documentary. I've been trying to watch as consistently as humanly possible documentaries of different artists, and specifically right now it's been street photographers. And I will do my best. A lot of times this has to be over washing dishes, but I will do my best to sit down and write down notes about what I'm learning from the documentary, because documentaries are my books essentially. And so I watched one about William Klein, street photographer, and he did a lot of his work in the 50s, and he would go into Harlem in New York, and just, white guy in Harlem, there's a juxtaposition there, and he would wander around and take photos of the people there, and the sort of wonderful timeliness, but also timelessness of his photos is amazing. The stuff that he would create, and the the types of people he would interact with, and just getting this view back into what the 50s looked like. And he also had his captions along with it, so you could kind of learn what he felt from that experience. And so it gains this value over time. It's like the photo is constantly changing its value, and we don't think about that right now because we live right now. But he didn't think about that then.
Yeah.
You know, now I'm not sure, to be honest. I'm not sure if he's still alive. I need to check on this, but because he was, when in the documentary, he was an older man, but but now he has this completely different perspective on things, because he's you know, he has made his way up into the 2000s, and everybody looks at him as one of the greatest street photographers of all time. And his work is moving, and people talk about it, and it's interesting. And not so much it's not so much for the sake of the popularity as it is the difference in the way that we interact with his photos, 60, 70 years later.
Yeah. Well, in that sense, like when you create something, it leaves your hands really, and people make of it what they want, and that sounds like a very obvious kind of thing, but you know, you can meet, like you see this in music, and like the Beatles writing, you know, a throwaway lyric about something, and then it becomes the beginning of a
mantra, a
hoax theory or something, you know.
Okay, yes.
You know, like people will take things and they react to it in their own way. And it's almost secondary to what the original artist intended. So, you know, if you think about, if he'd known maybe then that he would be considered as one of the greatest photographers of, what did you say, of all time, or street photographers of all time?
Greatest street photographers since street photography became a thing, when people could.
Yeah. So if he'd known that
out of their truck and put it in their hands.
If he'd known that people were saying that, then, you know, he may have taken different photos, and he may have had he might have felt too much pressure and
good point.
You know, whatever. So it's sort of like, again, it's one of those things where, you know, it's interesting when those things happen, but it's kind of secondary to what the artist is doing in a way. Yeah.
So the last question that I wanted to ask you, because I think this is a good point, is what do you hope somebody takes away from what you create, which is sort of in the vein of what we were just talking about?
Well, I like to leave people in a better way than I found them.
Okay, that's a good goal.
So, you know, if you come and watch one of my videos, whatever it is, I like to think that you've not had to worry about whatever you were worrying about before you sat down and pressed play. And you've just, and maybe I've inspired the viewer to do something, or to try something, or maybe they've just enjoyed me, you know, in the streets of London. Maybe they just enjoyed me interacting with someone. You know, maybe that will give them the confidence to do the same kind of thing themselves. You know, I think the important thing is really just that people just have a nice time. You know, there's no, I don't think that life has to be a struggle in any way. So yeah, so essentially, you know, come and watch a video and then just switch off and enjoy it, really. Because just generally everyone needs to switch off in life, because then everything will be so much happier. The more you think, the more problems you create for yourself.
Absolutely. Well, I always say that in my household, my dog is the happiest person in the room.
Yeah. Mine's just slept through this, completely oblivious to.
That seems like way more fun than what we're doing.
What do you say, sir?
I said that seems like way more fun than what we're up to. That's fantastic. Simple. I like it. Okay. Well, this is a good place to wrap up. Thank you so much again, Pablo. I really appreciate it. I'll put your links below, and would love to hear the thoughts of anybody who is watching and or listening to this. Go check him out. And everyone, have a lovely day. Thank you so much for watching. I hope we left you better than we found you.
Yeah, good.
All right, bye.
All right, bye.